One of you guys better take them away before I see them, I'll kill them both.
Where's everyone else at? They're downstairs? Okay, just set your shoes down there. What's going on?
Officers arrived to find a man standing outside, his hands soaked in blood. His name is Nathan Fry. He appears to be in shock, barely able to speak. "What's going on? I see blood all over your hands. What's going on?" the officer asked. Nathan points toward the house. He says a man named Chris was arguing with someone inside. There was shouting, then a gunshot. Officers detain him, unsure if he is a witness or something more. But then a second person emerges. Her name is Shannon. She made the 911 call, and what she tells officers contradicts everything Nathan just said. On the evening of November 6, 2022, a 911 dispatcher answered a call that would unravel a tangled web of violence.
911 location of your emergency?
We need an ambulance. Somebody's been shot.
Are they outside or inside?
No, they're inside the house.
Okay, is someone there at least controlling the bleeding?
I don't know.
Okay,
I
do you
don't
know where they
because
were
the
shot
ambulance
at?
now, she's in the chest or somewhere. It's in her head.
She's
It's
shot
in
in
her
the
head.
head?
Yes, she's
Okay,
not. Oh my
is
God.
she awake at all?
With a shotgun. Oh my
Shot in the
God.
head with a shotgun.
Yes.
Was this accidental? Is the gun still on scene?
Yes, it is.
Okay. All right, I
Okay.
just want to request that no one touch that weapon. I do have law enforcement and medical heading to you, okay?
A woman's voice, tight with panic, reported that someone had been shot inside a house. When asked where the victim was hit, the caller hesitated. "She's in the chest or somewhere. It's in her head." Then came the detail that turned a domestic dispute into a potential homicide investigation. A shotgun had been fired. The dispatcher instructed everyone to leave the weapon untouched and sent law enforcement racing toward a quiet residential street. Officers arrived to find a scene that did not immediately conform to any neat category. There was no suspect fleeing, no obvious perpetrator. Instead, a man stood outside with blood covering his hands, his face frozen in what appeared to be shock. He identified himself as Nathan Fry, 30 years old, and began offering a fragmented account. A man named Chris had been arguing with someone inside, throwing things, and then a shot rang out. Officers detained Nathan on the spot, uncertain whether he was a witness, a victim, or something more. They could not yet know that his version of events would be contradicted within minutes, nor that the truth would force them to untangle a love triangle marked by abuse, protection, and a fatal miscalculation. As officers worked to secure the scene, a second person emerged from the house. She was Shannon, the same woman who had made the 911 call. Her account differed sharply from Nathan's. "Nate pulled out the shotgun," she told officers without hesitation. "He's always carrying around weapons." In that single statement, the investigation pivoted. What Nathan had characterized as Chris's aggression now appeared to place the weapon in Nathan's own hands. Shannon admitted she had not witnessed the shooting directly. She had been in another room when the gun discharged, but she was relaying what another person had told her. That other person was Chris, the man Nathan had blamed, and Chris was still inside the house. With two inconsistent stories and a third person unaccounted for, officers grew concerned that the situation might not be over. They called for backup, surrounded the residence, and ordered Chris to come out with his hands visible. When he emerged, his clothing was also stained with blood. His words tumbled out in a disjointed stream, but the core of his statement was unmistakable. Nathan had been the one holding the shotgun. In the span of minutes, the narrative had fractured. Nathan pointed at Chris, while Chris and Shannon pointed back at Nathan. 3 witnesses, 2 conflicting versions, and 1 victim lying dead in a bedroom upstairs. Chris was escorted away from the house and briefly questioned at the scene. His appearance, disheveled, bloodied, speaking in fragments, made him a natural suspect in the eyes of arriving officers. But as investigators began pulling background information, they discovered that Chris was no stranger to law enforcement. Records showed multiple incidents at this same address, many involving domestic disturbances. Chris had a documented history of abuse, and some of those incidents directly involved the victim, Jennifer Lee. The police department knew this household well, a volatile dynamic between Jennifer, her ex-husband Chris, and her current boyfriend, Nathan Fry. All three had been living under the same roof, an arrangement that had produced repeated calls for service. Now one of them was dead. While Chris's history made him a person of interest, it also complicated the witness statements. If Chris had been the aggressor in the past, his claim that Nathan fired the shot could be self-serving. Conversely, Nathan's claim that Chris was the instigator might have been true, even if Nathan himself had pulled the trigger. Investigators realized they were not dealing with a simple case of one guilty party. They were looking at a tangled history where each person's credibility had to be weighed against documented patterns of behavior. Inside the bedroom where the shooting occurred, officers encountered a scene of devastating finality. Jennifer Lee lay on the floor, a shotgun wound to her head. A responding officer's body camera captured his murmured assessment. Large amount of brain matter on the ground. The weapon, a disassembled and partially rebuilt shotgun, rested nearby. Jennifer was 44 years old, a mother of two, and according to neighbors and records, a woman who had been caught in a cycle of conflict between the two men who claimed to care for her. As investigators documented the scene, a patrol officer was tasked with delivering the news to Jennifer's son, who had just arrived unaware. The officer's words were as gentle as such news can be, but the young man's reaction was volcanic. "Who just fired the arm, Nathan or Chris?" he demanded. When the officer could not give him an answer, the son's grief transformed into rage. "When you guys are taking my price, I will kill them both," he said before walking away. Minutes later, Jennifer's mother arrived. She was met by a police chaplain who gently told her that her daughter was gone. Her wail cut through the night air, a sound that officers later said they would not forget. In that moment, the case ceased to be about evidence and legal theories. It became about a family shattered by a single gunshot. Before Nathan Fry was transported for formal questioning, an officer approached him with a straightforward safety question. Where had he placed the shotgun? Nathan's answer was immediate and definitive. "I didn't have a shotgun." The officer, who had earlier heard Nathan reference the weapon during his initial rambling statement, pressed further. "You told me earlier you put it away." Nathan shifted, saying someone else had put the gun away. When asked how a shooting could have occurred if the weapon had already been secured, Nathan replied, "I don't know." Then came a more direct denial. "I didn't put it anywhere." That exchange marked a turning point. Investigators now had documented proof that Nathan was changing his story. If he had been an innocent bystander who witnessed a shooting, there would be no reason to deny handling a gun that was already known to be at the scene. The lie suggested consciousness of guilt, an awareness that admitting to touching the weapon could incriminate him. Officers also noted that Nathan's demeanor had shifted. The shock that seemed genuine upon their arrival now appeared to be hardening into evasion. They placed him in a patrol car and began preparing for a formal interview, aware that the man who had first presented himself as a traumatized witness was now their primary suspect. Chris was taken to a nearby fire station for a full interview. There, stripped of his bloodied clothing and seated across from detectives, he offered a version of events that would shape the investigation's next phase. He explained that he and Jennifer had been arguing, something he characterized as routine. During the confrontation, he said, Jennifer moved toward him aggressively, and he pushed her back into the bedroom. That was when Nathan, who had been elsewhere in the house, entered the room and jumped onto the bed. According to Chris, Nathan then stepped back, lost his balance on the soft mattress, and the shotgun, which Nathan had been holding, discharged. Chris described hearing the blast and feeling a spray of liquid. He thought he had been shot. When he realized he was unharmed, he saw that Jennifer had been hit. "He just got scared," Chris said of Nathan. The implication was clear. The shooting had been an accident, a tragic result of a man trying to intervene and stumbling with a weapon in his hands. Detectives listened without revealing their own doubts. They knew that Chris had a history of violence against Jennifer. They also knew that his account conveniently placed Nathan as the sole person responsible. But the narrative was internally consistent, and it aligned with Shannon's earlier statement that Nathan had been the one holding the shotgun. When detectives sat down with Nathan Fry, they employed a calculated psychological strategy. They began by reviewing the events he had already described: the argument, Chris's aggression, Nathan's attempt to protect Jennifer. But when Nathan continued to deny having held the gun, the lead detective pivoted. He presented Nathan with a version of the shooting that was far more damaging: that Nathan had deliberately aimed the shotgun at Chris, intending to shoot him, and had accidentally struck Jennifer instead. "That's homicide," the detective said flatly. "That's murder." The accusation hung in the air. Nathan's composure began to crack. The detective then offered a lifeline. He suggested an alternative: that Nathan had only pointed the gun to scare Chris, that the discharge was unintentional, that the whole event was a tragic accident born from a desire to protect. It was a classic interrogation technique: offer a worse scenario to make a lesser admission seem reasonable. And it worked. Nathan slowly began to acknowledge that he had picked up the shotgun, that he had pointed it at Chris, and that he had been on the bed when the gun went off. He was no longer denying his involvement, but he was not yet admitting intent. The detective had gained ground, but the full story of how the unstable weapon had fired was still locked inside Nathan's memory. As the interrogation progressed, the focus shifted to the shotgun itself. Detectives had already noted that the weapon was not a standard firearm. It had been damaged, its stock loose, its trigger guard missing. Nathan had been working on it, trying to restore a shotgun that had belonged to a deceased family member. Now, under questioning, he described the weapon's dangerous condition. "It's very touchy," he said. "There's no trigger guard." He explained that the hammer had already been pulled back when he grabbed the gun. When the detective asked whether he had intentionally pulled the trigger, Nathan insisted he had not. His finger, he said, had made contact with the exposed mechanism while he was trying to steady himself on the bed. The weapon, already unstable, had discharged. The detective pressed. Could the hammer have fallen on its own? Nathan said no. He believed his finger had brushed the trigger, but it had been an accident, not a deliberate act. In that moment, the full picture emerged. Nathan Fry had entered the room intending to intimidate Chris, to use the threat of the shotgun to stop the argument. But the weapon he chose was unreliable, missing safety features, essentially a misfire waiting to happen. When his footing gave way on the soft mattress, the gun fired. Jennifer, who had been standing between the two men, took the blast. With Nathan's confession recorded, the legal case moved swiftly. He was charged with first-degree manslaughter and first-degree unlawful possession of a firearm. The manslaughter charge reflected the prosecution's view that Nathan had acted recklessly, arming himself with a deadly weapon and using it in a volatile situation, even if he had not intended to kill. The unlawful possession charge stemmed from his status as a convicted felon. He was prohibited from owning or handling firearms. Rather than proceed to trial, Nathan accepted a plea agreement. On February 8, 2024, he stood before a judge and was sentenced to 12 years in state prison. Chris, despite his documented history of domestic abuse and his role in the argument that preceded the shooting, was not charged with any crime related to Jennifer's death. The decision drew no public explanation, but it reflected the reality that all witness accounts and physical evidence pointed to Nathan as the shooter. For Jennifer's family, the sentence brought a measure of closure, but could not fill the absence left by her death. Her son, who had threatened revenge on the night of the shooting, was left to process his grief within the boundaries of the law. The case of Nathan Fry and Jennifer Lee offers no easy resolution. It is a story of good intentions colliding with fatal choices. Nathan entered that bedroom wanting to stop a man who had abused Jennifer in the past. but he carried an unstable weapon into a confrontation, and in the chaos of the moment, his attempt to intimidate became the act that killed the woman he was trying to protect. Chris, whose documented history of violence set the events in motion, walked away without criminal charges. The household that had generated repeated police calls is now quiet. Jennifer's children must navigate a world without their mother. For Nathan, 12 years in prison means missing more than a decade of his own life, a sentence that reflects the law's judgment that recklessness with a deadly weapon carries devastating consequences, regardless of intent. The shotgun that ended Jennifer's life remains in evidence, a broken collection of metal and wood that should never have been used as a tool of intimidation. In the end, the case forces a difficult question. When does a protector become a perpetrator? The answer in this instance lies somewhere in the space between a man's intentions and the irreversible outcome of his actions.